I'm making a floating overlay panel for this box. So I want to make a cut into there which will allow it to fit in that groove. I've made the test cuts, so here I go with the underside of the top panel against the fence. And so the next thing I want to do is cut the end grain first and then the side grain. By cutting the end grain first, what I do is eliminate any kind of tear out at the back side, which goes away when the side grain is cut. So this has built within it the potential of the top expanding and contracting, but with you never being aware that anything is taking place. What I'm going to do with this 1/8 inch radius roundover bit is route the top edges of the box and the top panel. So that's the way the finished panel will look. Before I assemble this box, I'll have to cut the hidden spline that goes in there. I'll have to do the sanding just on the roundover, the top edge, and I just sand every edge, every surface that won't be available to me when the box is assembled. What I'm doing is I'm cutting what's called a hidden spline slot, and I did that using this special jig in my shop. The purpose of it is to be able to lock corners the way this is done. It's beautiful because it allows the continuation of the wood grain undisturbed around the side of a box. You don't really know that a craftsman has been there until you open the lid and you see the beautiful contrasting wood. This jig, as you can see, is very easily made. Here's how we did it. The exact dimensions are not important. I've cut this to a width that just seemed to be reasonable to me for the size of the box I'm going to be making. I want the platform itself to be wide enough to support the box and yet still not be so large that I can't get clamps in to fit. So the measuring is not important, but I'm just going to make this about 7 3/4 inches. I measured to where this fits the saw curve. So this becomes the angled platform to support the box during the router cut. And this piece will become the base that rides along the router table. Now the next piece that will be needed, I need to cut a thin strip that will serve to help me align the box part onto the jig. So I'm going to put it together by using glue. I'm going to tape it together to hold everything securely in position. And then I'm going to use brad nails to give it some extra strength. Hold everything while that glue's set. That provides a nice secure base. And now I'll add this. The purpose of this strip is simply to hold the box square as it's being routed, and it keeps it from sliding. This is a 3/16 inch straight cut router bit. I'm raising it, trying to get it at 3/16 of an inch, and I've done a pretty good job. It's actually just a very slight amount higher, and that is okay because I don't want this hidden spline when it goes in to bottom out. I want just a little bit of space for glue. And my next thing is going to be to set my hidden spline jig in place, and you can see where that's going to cut. And so I can observe exactly where I want my fence to be located. Lock it in position right there. So I'm really going as much by the visuals here as by any kind of measuring. And I can see now that it's not going to be cutting through in the surface here. I can also see that it's set back and will be pretty much centered in the stock. So now the next thing I want to do is set the stop blocks. And so setting the stop blocks is also a pretty simple procedure. If I just simply turn my stock over and place it against the jig, I can make a decision where I want the beginning and the end of the cut to take place. This is my first cut at a 1/2 inch, so I'm going to lay this stop block in here. Okay, so that controls the cut one direction. And then if I slide it back over here and I use my tape measure, I can find my opposite stopping point. I'll clamp this stop block in place. So now, of course, I have this mounted the wrong way on here. So I'll have to take it like this and hold it in position. I want to clamp this piece in place. So I want a little padding there to keep the clamp from marring the surface. Tighten it down. Now the thing I want to double check is that this is flush on the back side with the base of the jig. Okay, that feels pretty good now. So my next step is I'll lower this in place and I'll push it along until it hits the other stop block, and then I'll pull it back. And the purpose of pulling it back is that will remove all of the debris, all of the sawdust that's been generated inside that cut. Now next, do each one. So that's a set of box front, back, and sides, all cut for the Hidden Spline miter. I've chosen this walnut because it will be a nice contrast with the sassafras front, back, and sides. So the first thing I need to do is actually rip this stock to the width. So I'm going to plane down about a 1/16 of an inch to fit the slot. That's not a bad fit. I want to double check the fit in each of the joints just to make sure. I'm putting in an 1/8 inch radius roundover. There we go, that's not a bad fit. It goes in easy enough. A little bit of space for glue. I'm going to trim up an end. Before I cut the rest of them, I want to just put one in place and put them together, and I want to observe that the miter closes. Now that I'm sure of my fit, I'll cut 3 more pieces. I've got my parts all laid out in the order in which they go together. I've got these clamps set up approximately the right width, so I don't have to spend a lot of time adjusting. And I've got these blocks, which I'll use to distribute the clamping pressure. So I'm going to start gluing. When you're gluing a miter, you're mostly dealing with end grains, so you've got a very absorbent wood that can really soak up a lot of glue. So you have to make sure you do both surfaces. I'll take that and I'll spread that evenly there. I'm going to try to keep things somewhat in order as I go. So I'll put that spline in place. I'm going to do the same thing with this. Okay, so I've got one spline at each end. I can take this is my front piece. I put the sanded area towards the inside of the box. Now I can start assembling the box. Next comes, and now a lot of people will say, well, why are you making a box that you can't get open? And you're going to see the secret of that later. So here we go, into the clamps. Slide these clamps forward. So I'm going to slide some blocks in here just to distribute the pressure evenly across that joint. And then I can tighten these up. This particular box, because it's got the hidden splines, it takes a certain amount of clamping pressure to pull everything into alignment. And unlike a conventional miter that's kind of hard to get the corners exactly located when you're using clamps, these hidden splines do the locating for you. And so if you can get adequate clamping pressure on all sides of the box, it should pull the corners tightly together. I'm going to measure from corner to corner. Looks like that box is square. I often will glue up as the last thing at the end of a day and come back in the morning, so I'm absolutely certain that things have had plenty of gluing time. Should be ready at this point for sanding. On this little sassafras box, before I cut the lid from the base, I want to think about hinges and make some choices. This hinge to me feels too small. This one is probably okay in terms of the scale of the box. This one actually has more of a decorative appearance. I think I'm going to go with this one. This is a type of hinge that's available from my local hardware store. Be aware of this right here. If the hinge were up like that, it just really wouldn't work. So that gives me some information that I need about where that saw cut needs to be. And so I'm going to make that saw cut 2 13/16 from the bottom edge of the box. So I need to adjust my blade height to just below the thickness of the box sides. So I'm going to move my fence over to 2 13/16 inches. I'm going to make my first cut and then test it with the knife. For more details about how to cut the lid from the sassafras box, refer to the walnut box in Chapter 7. Now the beauty and the surprise of the hidden spline.